And feel free to, if you have questions or you want me to repeat something, feel free to interrupt. We're going to start with text. We'll look at how to add text into a sketch, but we'll also look at how to style it, how to add different fonts, how to manipulate the text, and make it look how we want it to. So we'll call this text example. You guys are good? So we'll save this and add it to our class collection. And so as usual, when you're getting started with a topic, it's good to look at the reference. So if we go over the reference page, you'll see there's a whole section for typography. And this will show you all the kind of different functions for drawing text, as well as styling text. And it's pretty straightforward. So text is the function we use to draw text. Text font, we'll set the font that we use. We can load fonts from a file. And then we'll also look at, in a moment, some of the other functions that we can use to style the text. So it's pretty straightforward to get started. We just use the text function. And this works a lot like circle or square or rectangle or ellipse. We're going to have an X and Y position. But the first argument for our text function is the text that we want to display. And this text takes the form of what's called a string. A string is just a string of characters. So string is sort of a programming term that we use to describe a string of characters. And those characters can be anything. They can include numbers, but they operate differently from numbers. So we use a lot of numbers to do things like size and position and color. To do text, we use strings. So if there are numbers in your string, they don't act like regular numbers. And a string is basically anything in between quotation marks. So I'll put a little note here as a reminder. So we have to use a string for the text to display. String is any string or sequence of characters. So if I want to put the text hello world, have you guys heard the phrase hello world before? So it's often the first thing that we'll do when we're learning a new programming language to test that we can use the console or do other things with the language. So if we write the text hello world, this is not going to do anything because we need to tell the text where we want it to go. So we need the text that we want to draw, but we also need a position. And the position is just like, as I mentioned, any other XY position that we've used for other shapes. So if I do 0, 0, it's going to be up in the top left corner. You may not see it because it draws from the bottom. So we'll look at some of the other properties of text in a moment, but let's move it down a little bit so that we can see it. Okay, so if I move it down 20 pixels on Y, then we see our text. It looks pretty boring, but we'll fix that in a moment. If I move it over 20 pixels on X, then we can move it over to the right. So that's the basic properties of text. Text by default just has a color fill. So if I change the fill to red or something like that, you can see the text is red. We can give it an outline as well. We'll make it a little bit bigger before we do that. But text, there's no special text function for the color. It's just the same color functions that we use for shapes. So if we change the fill, we'll make it red. We can change the stroke, but let's make it a little larger first. So if we want to make the text larger, we can use the text size function. And then we just use a number that represents the height of the text in pixels. So if I do 400, the text is going to be the size of our canvas. We only see the little bottoms of the text, again, because the text draws from the bottom by default. We can change that in a moment, but for now, let's see that our size matches the description. So let's move the text down to 400Y. And we'll see that it actually doesn't quite make it to the top of the canvas. So let's actually look at text size. Maybe we can learn more about how it works. Okay, so let's see text size. Okay, sets the font size when text is called. Font size is measured in pixels. So size of the letters in units of pixels. So we would think that if we made it 400, let's actually, maybe if we put it in the middle of the canvas. Now, you would think that if we made the text size 400 and our canvas is 400, that it would fill the whole canvas, but I guess it's not quite the case. Anyway, that's fine. Let's make it a little smaller so it's not so large. So let's make the text size 50, and there we go. That looks fine. We'll look at a slightly better way to do this in a moment, but that looks good for now. Let's move it back to the top of the page. And so now we can take a look at what it will look like with a stroke. So if I do a stroke and let's say yellow. It's very, very hard to see because the stroke is just 1 pixel by default. But if we increase the stroke weight, now we'll see this larger outline. And you might notice some weirdness. Let's move this down a little bit. So you might notice some weirdness around the W. You can see that the stroke is kind of pointing out above where the lines in the W connect. So the math that's doing the stroke is kind of not getting it 100% right. And we can fix that. This isn't, the most important thing in the world, but it often comes up if you're putting an outline on the text. Actually, I'm going to make it black so it's a little bit easier to see. Okay, there's a little more contrast there. So if we want to get rid of those little pokey things, we have to use something called the miter limit. This is just a general term in digital font rendering that describes the way that we calculate those curves in the font. And our default miter limit for the canvas where we're drawing the text is 10. And that's, not what we want. So there's a little bit of a trick to fix that, which I'll show you guys. It's not going to make the whole thing's not going to make that much sense right now, but it'll make more sense in a week or two when we learn some more stuff. But anyway, what we have to do is we have to get the canvas from this create canvas function, and then we can use that to set the miter limit. And so the way that I can do that is I can create a variable, which is what we're going to cover next week. But for now, to create a variable, just use the keyword var, and I'll just use C for canvas. So I'll say C equals create canvas. And so now we'll get a reference to the canvas, and we can change some of the properties. So I can say C.miter limit, and then I can change that value. So if I change that, I might need to change it to, maybe that's not the right, let's look in the reference and make sure I'm using the right term for this. Okay, maybe they changed this. Okay, let's take a look at the canvas reference and see if we can figure it out. All right, I'll search for canvas. Okay. I don't see it in here. Let's see if Google will tell us. P5 canvas miter limit. Oh, okay, I forgot a step. Oh yeah, I forgot we're using... Okay, so we actually have to do this thing called the canvas context. I thought that we didn't have to do that. That's weird. Okay, let's see if we say canvas.get context to D dot miter limit. No, I got an error there, so let's see. Let me check my own notes. I probably have something in here. Okay, so they call it drawing context. Okay, that's what I forgot. Okay, sorry about that. So let's just call this, so we have C, which stands for our canvas dot drawing context dot miter limit equals 1. Okay, so now you can see the way that the stroke wraps around the characters is a little bit different. And so instead of trying to make a smooth stroke around the sides, it just kind of cuts off the sides. Let's make our text even a little bit bigger so we can see that. And depending on what number we use here, like if we use 0, we just get these very square cutoffs. If we use 1, then we get this like one level of what sort of beveling around the edges. If we do 2, we go back to this kind of like square, but we lose these little edges. And I think if we go above 2, it doesn't, yeah, we start to get those little edges. So I think 2 probably looks the best. If you do 1, it looks a little bit weird and stylized. And if you do 0, you get those little edges. So this is only if if those little edges bother you, but let's just put a note here. Get rid of edges from stroke. All right. Okay, so let's continue. So another thing that we might want to do, you might want to fit your text to match the canvas. We can do that. There's another function that we can use if we go back to our typography reference. So this text width function will tell us the width of the text. So if we want to match the text to the canvas, we can figure out what the width of the text is going to be based on a specific text size. So the way that we need to do that, so we can take the text here and we can, well, we have to set the text size first. And so we can figure out what the width of the text based on this text size will be. So we can say text size or text width and then take our size of our text. So we can say hello world, or we just take the string that we're referencing. And then if we want to see this, we can print it out in the console. One thing that you're going to see is that if we do this, it's going to print out every single frame because we're in the draw function. And we don't really want to do that. That's going to be kind of crazy. So you can see your text size there. And so what you could do is we can do this in setup. So we don't want to be printing out hundreds of times the width of the text. But if we want to do this in setup, we can go up to our setup function and we can do this up here. So I can just grab these lines of code, I'll copy those and put them in setup. So remember that our setup function just runs once. So this is a good place to set up certain things that we want to figure out before we start rendering our project. So we can figure out get width of text. So we'll take this out of here. And we can see what that's going to be. And then we could either set our canvas based on that, or we could, make it smaller. Right now we can't really do that much with it because we haven't learned a lot of the stuff that we'll need to know. But I can take this text width and I can actually just put it right there in the width of the canvas, and it'll make my canvas a little bigger. And so now I forgot, I took text size out, but I need to leave it in here. So now my canvas will match the size of my text, although of course I have to start drawing at 0. Okay, so you can, if we do a little setup beforehand, we can figure out how big our text is going to be, and then we can set our canvas based on that. Of course, your text may be different sizes, or you may want to do different things. This is just something that comes up a lot, so that's how you would deal with that. All right. That's also only if you base this on 100. If we want to make that text smaller, of course, we have to change both of those numbers. So if I change this to like 80, now it's not going to fit the same size. But if I change this one also to 80, now it'll fit the same size. And we can see what that is down here, closer to our original text size. We'll be able to do a lot more interesting stuff with this in about a week when we learn variables and we can actually save references to these different pieces of information. But for now, we're just going to cover some of the basics. Okay, so let's look at some of the other stylistic things that we can do with our text. Any questions before we look at some of our other functions that we can use? What? Yeah. Up here. So, say that again. I can't. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Yeah. 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 You could change the height of the canvas. You don't have to do. I'm sticking in like the width of this hello world as the width of the canvas. But you don't have to do that. You can just put a number there and match it visually, or you can have a different design. This is another thing that people ask about, so I'm just demonstrating it, but it might be a little more complicated than you really need to worry about. All right, so the next thing we can change is the font. Your browser has some built-in fonts. Those are different depending on which browser you're using. So a good website to figure that out is CSS Font Stack. If you go to this website, maybe you've seen it before when you learn CSS in MMP 100 or something. This will show you a bunch of different fonts that are already built into most browsers, but it also shows you how much support they have on Windows versus Mac, because not every font is on both. So for example, Arial is a very common font. It's on 99.8% of Windows machines and 98.7% of Mac machines. So if you want to use Arial, you can feel pretty confident that it'll be supported. Futura is only on 1% of Windows machines and 94.4% of Mac machines. So if you like Futura, you can be pretty confident it'll show up on a Mac, but if somebody loads your project on a Windows, they probably won't see it. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So if we want to use one of these default fonts, we can find something that has a lot of Mac support. We could use Futura as an example. And we don't have to do anything other than just set the font. So if I say text font, and then this value is going to be in quotation marks. So kind of like our color values and our text value down here, anything that is text-based or like a sequence of characters is going to have quotation marks around it. So if we use Futura as our text font, since I'm on a Mac, we should see the font change. Of course, that also changes the size of my text. So anything that I want to use, if I want my text to match, which again, you don't have to do this, just something that comes up sometimes, we'd have to do the same setup up here. So we can use a built-in fonts, but as I mentioned, if you send this to somebody and they're on Windows, they're almost certainly not going to see the Futura font. They'll see the default font. So that's not the end of the world, but if we want to use a font that we're pretty sure is going to work and will get loaded into the browser, not by default, but because we ask it to, we can use a CSS font. And we can, import our own font. So you guys have probably seen fonts.google.com before, if you've done any CSS or you've done any web-related stuff. We can grab a font from here and import it into our CSS page, and then we can use it in our P5. I already have a font in here because I've used this before. I'm just going to remove it and go back to here. So if you've never seen Google Fonts before, it's just a lot of free fonts that you can use. It's very easy to use because it actually gives you the code for embedding the font. So we can type in a preview of what we are writing, and then we can just kind of look through the fonts, or you can filter for specific stuff. So if you want to find something playful, we can look through here. And if you like something, I'm just going to use this as an example. When you click on that, you can click Get Font. You may want to look at some of the styles. It only has one style. Some fonts have multiple styles, but this only has one. So it doesn't have like an italic or bold or anything. It just has the default style. So if that's fine, you can click Get Font and then go to Get Embed Code. And you can either embed it in the HTML or the CSS. I tend to use the CSS, but either way is fine. So I'm going to go to @import. Link is for HTML, @import is for CSS. You don't need the style tags because we already have a CSS style sheet with the project. So you really just need this import section down here. You can copy the code, but then you'll have to delete the style tags, but you can just copy this section. So I'm going to hit Command-C. And for this to work, I need to actually import it in my CSS style sheet. So if I open the file browser with this little guy over here, and I import the font, so I'm just going to paste this in here. Now I can use the font just by using the name of the font as the same way I use the built-in font. So I just have to copy the name of the font from here and go back to my sketch. And I'll put Google font here and paste that in. And so there we go. We have a different font there. I'll make another piece of text down here so we can have something that looks a little bit different. Let's say, hi. So this is the world responding back to us. So I'll put this at like 200 or maybe like 100, and I'll move it down the page like that. Okay. And the text works the same way. You can see that the text size, since it's 80 up here, it's also 80 down here. If I want the world to be smaller or larger, I can change the text size down here to something really large, and then move it down a little bit farther, maybe move it over. So all the same rules that we're used to with color and other styles apply in the same way. All right, we're gonna look at a couple other things we can do with some more text. Any questions before we continue? Okay. So let's work with a larger chunk of text. So I'm going to move this back up a little bit. So sometimes you have text that goes over just the one line. And so to style it and to make it fit, you need to restrict where the text goes. So let's look at an example of that. I'm going to get some lorem ipsum text. Are you guys familiar with lorem ipsum? Okay, some people are, some people aren't. Lorem ipsum is filler text that designers use when they're designing like a magazine layout or an article. If they don't have the final text, lorem ipsum is just like a bunch of default text that you just throw in to, so you can see what the article will look like. There's a bunch of different websites where you can like generate lorem ipsum. I guess with ChatGPT now, you probably don't need this because you can generate tons of nonsense a lot more easily. But this is sort of the way that people have done it in the past. Anyway, let's just grab this first paragraph. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to put it here. So this is going to look a little crazy because there's going to be a ton of text. In next week when we do variables, we'll look at better ways to do this. But for now, for this example, let's just throw it in. So I'm going to throw in this huge, long, kind of crazy looking piece of text. And then I'll give it an X and Y position. So for X, I'll do 10. And for Y, I'll do like 200. And let's make it much, much smaller. So I'll change the text size to 10. And let's get rid of the stroke for now. And let's move it down just a little bit more. Okay, so you can see there's a lot of text here, but it's going all the way out the end of our canvas. So it's not wrapping around the way you would expect text to do if you were working with, Microsoft Word or Google Docs or something like that. But we're writing our code from scratch. We're not using a GUI editor, so we have to do it ourselves. So what we can do is set the width of the text. That will create like a box that will tell the text where to stop, on the side. So if I say like 200, now you can see the text gets restricted to that area. So that's an optional parameter. My text works fine without that parameter, but if I add that in, it adds another component to it. So remember with P5, some of our parameters are optional. If we look at our text reference and we scroll down a little bit, you can see the string or str is the first parameter, that's our text. Then X and Y, those are not optional. We have to have a position where the text starts. But then the width and the height are optional. So if we add those in, it'll change the way the text works. So I have the X and Y, and then if I add a width, let's do like 300. Now we can wrap our text there. We can also restrict the Y. So if I say like 100 on Y, it's going to cut off. Or if I do like 50 on Y. We don't really want to cut off the text, so I'm just going to ignore the Y and let it take up whatever space is left. And maybe I'll make it even a little bigger, like let's do 360. Maybe 380. Yeah, okay. So there's a couple other properties we can play with our text. Once we have more lines, we can play with the text align. We can actually do that with anything. But we can play with the text align, and we can play with the leading. So the leading is the space in between lines, and the align is, how the text is aligned. So if we say text leading, it's going to match whatever the font size is. So if I say 10 here, or it's going to be a little bigger than the font size rather. So if I say 10, notice when it's default, it's a little bit bigger. And when I set it to 10, now the text is really cramped. If I set it to like 20, now the text is spread out more. So the leading, you kind of want to have a good value where it's not too far spread out, but it looks decent with the text you're using. This text is really small, so I'm going to make this a little bigger. And usually people do like 1.5. So 1.5 times 12 is 18, but you could also just say 12 times 1.5 if you don't want to do the math. Usually 1.5 or 1.5 of your size is a good default to start with for your text leading. Okay, so now let's look at the text align. So the alignment has top or vertical as well as horizontal. The horizontal is the first parameter. So if we change the alignment with just one parameter, it's going to do the horizontal. If we change it with 2 parameters, it'll do horizontal and vertical. So if I say text align, and the defaults for these look a little weird. They're all caps. When you see all caps in code, that means it's a constant. That means it's a value that doesn't change. And it's just a way to have a value that represents something that's always the same. So if I say text align center, the default is left. When I say text align center, notice that it centers my paragraph. It centers everything else as well because I never set the text align up here. So if I don't want the top guys to realign, I can go up here and say text align is left. So all caps left is the default. All caps center is center text, and then right is right-oriented text. So when we have right-oriented text, the X value still describes the left side of the text. So if I move X over, it's not moving the right side of the text, it's moving the left side of the text. So the first parameter is going to be horizontal. The second parameter is vertical. So the default is it draws one line of text from the bottom, but it draws 2 lines of text from starting with whatever the first line of text is at the bottom. So if I change text align vertical to top, you can see that the text goes down because now it's aligned from the top of the letters rather than from the bottom of the letters. If I say bottom, it'll go back to the way it was, but you can see our paragraph of text is also moving up. And if I say center, now it's centered, in vertically as well. So if I have my text here centered, I either need to reset up here or move it down or kind of play with it. So maybe I'll move it down a little bit. Okay. So that's text alignment. You can see there's a few other properties that we can play with. There's text wrap. There's some of the ones, if you read the descriptions, some of the things change the style of the text, but some of them tell you stuff about the text. So like text ascent is kind of like text width. It just tells you how tall the tallest piece of text is. And same thing with text descent. So with text, some of the letters go below the baseline, like a G or a Y. Some of the letters go above the top of the text, like L or maybe H. And so these just tell you how far they go. Text size, we already saw. Text style is for like bold or italic. We can't do that with our Google fonts, so I'm just going to ignore that for now. And yeah, that's pretty much covers most of what we need to know there. Trying to think if there's anything else we want to look at. No, I think that's pretty much it. Any questions about any of those functions? Okay, cool. So we can do some workshop time. I'll stop the